Ever since China officially announced its V-Day parade, commemorating the 80th anniversary of its victory in the war against Japan and the global anti-fascist war, the event has captured the world's attention. From the massive publicity campaign to the sheer scale of the troops and equipment on display, it's clear that Beijing places immense importance on this parade. Yet, just half a month before the event, European media began floating the idea that the EU might boycott the parade to protest Vladimir Putin's attendance. Sure enough, when China released the official guest list on August 28th, the leaders of the major EU countries were absent. The only notable European attendee was the Prime Minister of Slovakia, a well-known EU maverick. For boycotting such a historically significant event, Europe has shown no shame. In fact, they seem proud of it. At a press conference, a Reuters reporter even had the audacity to ask the Chinese spokesperson, with a tone of smug superiority, how important is it for China to have Western leaders attend the parade? The subtext was clear. Without the West's stamp of approval, China's parade, no matter how grand, is just a provincial spectacle. In the eyes of these European nations, they are the representatives of the mainstream world. If we were to turn the clock back 200 years, that attitude would have been justified. Back then, Europe, with its head start in the Industrial Revolution, was the undisputed master of the world. Most of Asia, Africa, and Latin America were its colonies or semi-colonies. In that context, Europe's claim to speak for the world was backed by hard facts. Eurocentrism wasn't just an internal narrative to justify colonial aggression, it became the dominant academic consensus worldwide. Even in the 20th century, the claim wasn't entirely baseless. Although Europe was devastated by two world wars and its traditional powers like Britain and France were clearly outmatched by the United States and the Soviet Union, the inertia of its former dominance remained. The change in the global balance of power is always slower than the change in national strength. Eurocentrism was deeply entrenched, especially in academia. Both the US and the Soviet Union, despite knowing that Europe was a shadow of its former self and that their only real rival was each other, still saw expanding their influence in Europe as the ultimate prize. So both superpowers poured vast resources into their respective European allies, helping their economies recover and providing them with security guarantees. Propped up by the two giants, a weakened Europe could still project an aura of power. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Europe's strategic value plummeted. America's attitude shifted from support to suspicion. At the same time, developing nations, led by China, began to close the gap. In many areas, China has even surpassed the West. Yet Europe seems completely oblivious to this seismic shift. It continues to operate by the old Cold War playbook,
believing that as long as it's tied to the United States, its security and global influence are guaranteed. The consequence of this delusion is that, since the beginning of the 21st century, Europe's development has stagnated, and in some cases even regressed. Its international influence has steadily declined. In times of peace, it could paper over the cracks, but the war in Ukraine has laid its weakness bare for all to see. It couldn't stop the war from starting. It has given away its own active-duty military equipment to Ukraine, yet it has failed to prevent Russia from gaining the upper hand. And now, in the peace talks, it has been completely sidelined by both Russia and the United States. Everyone can see Europe's feebleness, except, it seems, Europe itself. It still acts as if it's the center of the universe. Faced with a potential US-Russia deal, Europe, though powerless to change the outcome, has resorted to obstruction and loud protest, trying to use public opinion to force its way to the negotiating table where it absurdly demands the largest piece of the pie. If this is how Europe treats its protector, the US, and a nation that has proven to compose a real security threat, Russia, imagine its attitude toward a peaceful, developing China thousands of miles away. Even though China is, in many ways, Europe's economic lifeline, Europe still treats it with a sense of superiority. It has made the absurd demand that China help it contain Russia so that it can then turn around and confront China. Even more ridiculously, it never even considered the possibility that China would refuse. When Beijing made it clear that it would not act against its own interests, Europe was shocked. But instead of self-reflection, it has continued to demand that China choose a side. China, for its part, is done coddling Europe's arrogance. Europe's initial outreach to China was a desperate move. It was being squeezed on two fronts, militarily by Russia and economically by the America First trade wars. China, as the engine of the global economy, was its best hope. In fact, given that China was already in a trade war with the U.S. and is Russia's largest trading partner, it was the only country with both the guts and the ability to help Europe. But Europe, in its arrogance, has managed to thoroughly offend China. The only result will be to make its already dire economic situation even worse. Yet even now, Europe continues to act as the spokesperson for the international mainstream, believing that any country that defies it is an enemy of the world. Now, with this highly significant V-Day parade, Europe has tried to play another card. After months of buildup, it is suddenly announced that if Putin attends, its own leaders will not, in an attempt to pressure China into joining its campaign to isolate Russia. But the reality is that, whether in terms of national strength or its relationship with China, Russia is far more important to Beijing than Europe is. Furthermore, on the issue of the anti-fascist
narrative, a narrative the West has spent years trying to distort by downplaying the contributions of China and the Soviet Union, China and Russia have a shared interest in defending the historical truth. On August 28th, China officially released the guest list for the parade. Vladimir Putin's name was at the very top, a clear signal of the importance China places on its relationship with Russia. Seeing its gambit fail, Europe, either out of fury or pure hubris, sent that Reuters reporter to ask his malicious question at the press conference. China's response was, in essence, a diplomatic shrug. The spokesperson simply said to look at the guest list and reiterated that the purpose of the event was to remember history, honor the martyrs, cherish peace, and open up the future. The subtext was clear. We are not doing this for your approval. You can come or not, but if you choose not to come now, don't be surprised if we are less than enthusiastic when you come to us for help in the future. This is a momentous event that will shape the future. Europe chose not to participate, so in the future, China will be perfectly justified in dealing with Europe on the basis of pure interest, not friendship. If Europe doesn't wake up soon, and while it still has some relevance in the international system, embrace the tide of history and work with China to build a more equitable New World Order, it may one day find itself in the embarrassing position of being the only continent in decline, while the rest of the world moves forward.